news just in. There have been reports of heavy bombardment of Rafah by the Israeli army. This follows an evacuation order given to residents in the area. The strikes come as US President Joe Biden is expected to speak to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. Now, earlier, Israel's military began what it called a limited and a temporary evacuation of civilians from Rafah in southern Gaza. Those are live visuals coming from that area. More than 1 million people have sought refuge in Rafah. There is growing pessimism just over the prospects of an imminent ceasefire in Gaza after a surge in violence yesterday saw 3 Israeli soldiers and several Palestinians killed. These soldiers were hit by Hamas rockets at one of the main crossings used to deliver critical aid to Gaza, prompting its closure by the IDF. To this now, France will send its ambassador to the inauguration of Russian President Vladimir Putin for his next 6-year term in office on Tuesday, while Germany said it would not be represented. Putin won a record post-Soviet landslide, cementing his already tight grip on power in Russia's presidential election held in March. SABC News correspondent Dasha Chernyshova joins us now live from Moscow for an update on the preparations. I would imagine, Dasha, that there is a lot of engagement with other international, heads of state as this inauguration takes place. Just talk to us about what then we can expect.
Well, that's right. We haven't had, though, the confirmation from the Kremlin with regards to the possible international guests attending the inauguration of President Vladimir Putin that is due to take place on Tuesday. We understand that Yuri Ushakov, Kremlin's aide, will be given his press briefing later on Monday to brief the media on those preparations, particularly with regards to the international guests. So for this moment, we don't know who will be attending. Having said that, keep in mind that Moscow is obviously in a very difficult situation now when it comes to the relations with the Western countries, with all ties almost severed between Moscow and the West. The French ambassador that you have just been referring to has also been summoned to the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Monday. We're yet to hear what the reason for that, but before he was summoned, the UK ambassador to Russia was also summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry. We understand from the minister's statement that Moscow has issued the strong protest over the statements coming from London that the UK supplied weapons to Ukraine could be used against the targets in Russia. So certainly the inauguration of the Russian president is taking place in the context of the ties between Moscow and the West being almost cut off, the sides not really hearing one another, and Moscow saying that it will have to continue with its operation in Ukraine because it does see that it is actually not just fighting with Ukraine, but it is fighting with the Western countries. And the West, according to Moscow, is fighting with Russia with the hands of the Ukrainian people. So on Tuesday, the President Vladimir Putin is expected to be sworn in for his 5th term. That means that he will be the president of the country for 6 more years until 2030, and that will be taking place at the Kremlin in the lavish ceremony that is expected to take place about noon Moscow time on Tuesday in the presence of the heads of the Russian Federation Council, Russia's State Duma, as well as the Russian Constitutional Court. So that is symbolizing the division of power in Russia, the legislative, the executive, and the law enforcement one. So certainly this ceremony is widely expected by many Russians, but the big question is whether there will be some changes in the Russian government. However, it is not expected that Russia will be changing the course in general.
And I was going to speak about that because we are likely then to see some of those critical changes in a government. I mean, should we see a likelihood of a very strong candidates then being brought in? What are the likely key priorities, for Russia going forward?
Well, certainly if you speak about the priorities for the country at this moment, that is the end to the conflict in Ukraine. Now, if the Russian president, many experts say, consulted with the Russian people in 2022 whether to start the operation in Ukraine, probably they say the Russians wouldn't have backed that. But now, 2 years into the conflict in Ukraine, the Russians are not ready to surrender, and this is also proven by the numerous public opinion polls. So certainly at the moment the top priority is the end to the conflict in Ukraine, while obviously the Russian president considers himself to be the only person capable of doing that at this stage, and many Russians do hope that this conflict ends sooner than later. Obviously, another issue for the Russian president is to ensure that the country is developing in a way that is favorable for the economic growth because of the international sanctions that have been imposed against Russia. Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world, and obviously economy provides for the well-being of the people. Russia does still have to fight with the poverty, which is still high, and the Russian president has outlined this issue in his address to the Federal Assembly earlier this year. That's why we are expecting several more projects and support measures to be taken by the Russian authorities in order to make sure that people do have an opportunity for the stable economic development that will be leading to the increase in the well-being of the Russian people. But obviously there are also the problems that have to be tackled. One of them is the demography. Russia is facing the demographic gap with the shortage of labor that is so badly needed in the situation when you need economic growth.
As we wrap up, just give us on a lighter note in terms of what are we likely then to see, during that ceremony of the inauguration?
Well, certainly we will be seeing the beautiful pictures of the Kremlin from inside. The ceremony will be taking place in the halls of the Kremlin, the George Hall, the St. Andrews Hall. Those are fantastically beautiful pictures that we will be receiving all around the globe. The Russian president walking around along those corridors at the Kremlin. Then the ceremony will certainly see a lot of people attending it. Many of them are the Russian elites. There will be the sign of the president and the constitution that will be brought towards the podium, where the president is expected to swear an oath, to take the oath to the Russian people. We will hear the swearing ceremony, and the Russian president is expected to address the Russian people, because it is to the people of Russia that he will be swearing. So certainly the beautiful pictures of the Kremlin is something that we are all expecting to see, especially since on Tuesday Moscow will be quite rainy.
All right, Dasha, thank you so much for that. Of course, Dasha Chernyshova there, just giving us a sense of what to expect then tomorrow as Russian President Vladimir Putin enters his next 6 years of term in office.